is a little joke I think I heard from our friend Elmer some time back about a couple of guys. They were out walking their dogs, and it was kind of a warm day, and they were walking by kind of a pub, and one of them said, "You know, let's go in and get a nice cold beer." And the other guy said, "Well, we're not going to be able to go in with our dogs." And he goes, "Sure we will, just follow my lead." So he kind of goes in, and there's a waiter right inside the door, and he says, "Well, you can't bring that dog in here." And he says, "Well, I'm blind, it's my seeing eye dog." He says, "All right." Okay, so he goes on in. So the other guy goes up then, and he goes in, and sure enough, the waiter says, "You can't come in here with the dog." And he says, "I'm blind, this is my seeing eye dog." And the waiter says, "They gave you a chihuahua for a seeing eye dog?" and the guy goes, "They gave me a chihuahua?" Well, spring is here. I tell you what, the green is coming out so fast, it's like magic almost, isn't it? You go out in the morning and you look, and it's like things are up 4 inches that weren't there yesterday. It's just this amazing growth spurt of spring is all around us. It's my favorite season of the year, and I'm just always just amazed every day. It's like magic. The plants that come up. I got little hostum noses peeking up out of the ground. There's redbud trees where the purple flowers come right out of the bark of the tree before there's any leaves or anything. It's just magical to perceive. The insects too. All of a sudden, we had a warm day last week, all of a sudden these mason bees came out. I have a bee house my niece gave me some years back, and where do they come from? All of a sudden, boom, they're out buzzing around and visiting all the new wildflowers popping up. I'm struck by the incredible timing of it. The incredible timing of it that is built right into the plants, the trees, the flowers, the insects, the wildlife, the incredible timing of growth. Everything knows when it's time to come out and grow. It's amazing, isn't it? And it makes me reflect about, we're a part of nature. That must be a part of us as well, that internal awareness, that perfect timing that we can go with just as easily as the plants and the insects do. It's a wonderful quote from Shakespeare, I think it's from Hamlet, that never leaves my mind somehow, comes back to mind again and again. The readiness is all. Do you remember that quotation? The readiness is all. It's the being prepared. It's the being ready. That's what makes everything happen. That's like the crux of the matter. The readiness, being ready. And I think that's a big part of growth. The readiness is a critical factor in that. In our lives too, we can be intuitive about knowing when the time is right to come out in certain ways, to move forward, to come up a little higher. We can be in touch with that and letting it guide us. The trouble is, we don't always kind of want to take that approach. We're in a little bigger of a hurry, or we've got our little egoic agendas. We're pretty sure we know what we want to happen and when, which is usually now or as soon as possible. We've got a lot of ways that we want to try to push things, manifest things, kind of push them along. We don't want to really kind of wait on guidance, do preparatory, kind of internal work. We want to push it forward. And looking back on my life, I think I'd say that was part of a lot of the troubles in my life, was that wanting to push things, push my agenda, make things happen. A growth I wanted to experience, a self I wanted to become, something I wanted to be successful at. I wanted to push it and make it happen instead of letting it happen, letting myself be guided in it. We often try to force things in life, kind of force our growth, even our spiritual growth. And often that's the way misery lies. That's the way trouble lies, the challenges. Because really, the timeline on human growth varies widely. Wouldn't you agree? The timeline on human growth varies widely. I was thinking about, how when we were kids, you'd stand in a doorway somewhere and somebody would put a little pencil mark over your head, and you'd measure that with the yardstick, and you've come up to here. I don't know what age we stopped doing that, but by adults, that yardstick is kind of an invisible thing, and it really varies widely on how we're growing, how far we're coming up, when is time for a growth spurt, when we're going through a growth spurt, and when we're not. Sometimes it feels like we're kind of hanging at a certain level for a good long while. Anybody ever have that experience? I think so. I think so. We have even idioms for how long it can take sometimes. We talk about late bloomers, usually more about ourselves than other people. We'll use that phrase about ourselves, but there really is no early, no late. There's just what is. There's just however long it's taking for things to be ready, and for the growth to occur naturally, kind of organically. That yardstick for human growth is wide, wide, wide. And I think we've all experienced that in our lives. Sometimes we'll look at others and we'll think, well, things are happening so quickly for them, that their growth, they're coming into their fullness, they're realizing their gifts, they're having success in sharing their gifts and talents with the world so easily. But quite often, we didn't see the preparatory work before that. We don't know how long it took for them to get to that place. Just as no one knows about us, how much readiness is being worked out in us, what kind of preparatory work is going on, when that outward growth spurt becomes visible to others. As we look around our world, famous people and demonstrate people manifesting their gifts in different ways in our world, we get little kind of instructional bits about that yardstick of human growth and how it happens and how various it is, and how internal a process it is about readiness that really can't track from the outside. I was looking again on YouTube. Everything is still out there, going back decades. But do you remember Susan Boyle, the wonderful singer?
Sure.
She showed up on, I think, her big moment where she became publicly recognized with her wonderful gifts of singing on Britain's Got Talent. I think it was back in something like 2009. And just kind of wowed people with these gifts that had always been with her, of course. And who knows what kind of readiness was going on before that moment. But she was 47 at that moment, and the whole audience was like, she's going to wow us, stepping up there and on the stage. Nobody expected this from a shy 47-year-old woman from rural Britain, a Scottish woman, I think. And she was living alone with her cat, Peoples. Her mother had recently died. This was the first, she cared for her mother for many years in the family home. This is the first time she'd performed out since her mother's passing. She'd certainly been singing her whole life. She sang in her parish church down through the years. She even did some, like a little recording demo at some point. She had been kind of doing preparatory work. She had been cultivating her gifts, but doing other work too. Who knows what kind of readiness work was going on, but in 2009 she was discovered more publicly and became kind of an instant success. And she's 10 years later now, she's 57 and she's still very successful. She travels, she sings in amazing, sings for queens and things like that, that kind of a life she has now, and she's very generous, a lot of philanthropy she does in her work. It's like she came out the gate at age 47 on Britain's Got Talent, ready for it, taking to it like a seasoned pro with confidence on large stages, singing for thousands of people. How did that happen? What kind of readiness was going on in her? Emotional preparedness, psychological preparedness, who knows what all was going on? Only the individual can know that and can know when they're ready for a big growth spurt just ahead and a spectacular showing like the daffodils and everything all around us right now. I saw another story recently. It was showing up in lots of news feeds, and it was on CBS Sunday Morning, an interview with an artist named Richard Phillips. He was a former auto worker in the Detroit area and got arrested and convicted of a crime back in 1971 and was imprisoned for 45 years, a crime he did not commit. He was exonerated. It's the longest time a U.S. inmate served before being exonerated. This just happened like in January. 45 years in prison. And what he did in prison to stay sane, he said, is he took up painting. He took up watercolors. And he painted watercolors in his prison cell. And he would make original greeting cards, sell them to inmates to buy new paints. He'd do paintings, and then he'd send them out, because he wasn't allowed to keep them at the prison. He'd send them out to kind of a pen pal on the outside. Did that for years and years. He was in training. He was becoming this fabulous artist in solitude under hard to imagine circumstances. But he's out now, and he's beginning to, because of financial needs, sell some of his work. And he had a show at a Detroit art gallery in January, just a few months ago, of 50 of his paintings. And he's getting rave reviews for his art. And the news stories are proliferating about him. And he's 73 now. Huge success as an artist at 73. God grew him behind bars. Those gifts were in there. That wholeness, those gifts were in him. And he found a way, by the grace of God, by the guidance of God in him, to keep kind of cultivating those and growing before anybody saw it. Years and years before anybody saw it, this readiness was going on and was building. And he came out of prison ready, a seasoned pro, a practiced artist. He talks about art like some illumined artist about all the dimensions of art. He knows it inside and out. And people are loving his work and being inspired by it and by his story. How long does it take? Who knows? Who knows? I think in our own lives, so often we wonder why certain things took so long to work out. Anybody ever wonder about that? I think so. Why did it take so long? Why did it have to get to that point? Or why did something never really work out? We wonder about these things. And I think for me, perhaps the most useful answer I've been able to come up with has to do with readiness. Maybe the readiness wasn't quite there for that, for what I envisioned at that time. Maybe there were some other ways I needed to get ready. I don't know. No judgment about it. There's never any reason for judgment about it, just readiness, the timing of that. It's hard to determine. Just as in spring, when's the right time for things to erupt into tremendous new growth, colorful, spectacular growth, it could be just ahead for us in some ways. Only we know at an intuitive level inside ourselves. So instead of forcing growth or trying to push things into manifestation with 1 million affirmations a day, with all kinds of plotting and planning, what's the better way? I think it's the way of nature. It's the intuitive way. It's the following guidance as it comes. It's practicing intuition. It's listening. It's being alert for guidance. Instead of forcing, how sometimes wholesale plant dealers will just go crazy with fertilizer to force this growth so that the plant looks really good for a little while, and then it tends to falter and fail because it's not for the long term. Sometimes it's that way with our forcing, trying to force growth. It's better to hold back and to wait, kind of like the gestation of offspring. It's got its own rhythm and timing we want to honor and not push forward. I think it's that way with the evolution of our higher selves. And sometimes we make it too hard. We think we have to reinvent ourselves. We're very critical of ourselves and think we have to start from scratch. But in fact, just like with the artist, just like with Susan Boyle, you are already gifted. You already have this pattern of wholeness in you. The Bible calls it the image of God. We all have that image in us, that wholeness within us, that divine pattern in our unique way. It's already in there, it's growing in us, it's outworking, it's manifesting, and gradually becoming more and more outward to where others can reap the benefits of it as well. We don't have to invent the wheel. The wholeness pattern is always in us. We have to just be alert in the very moment of our lives for guidance in how how we're expressing it now. Mindfulness is a term from Buddhism that comes to mind. It's the age-old spiritual tenet, be present right here, right now, at this moment of our lives, cultivating our awareness of God and letting it guide us, letting it grow us. And the ideas will come, the creative ideas will come, the doors will open, the invitations will arrive. Baba Ram Dass wrote a little book on this idea called Be Here Now. Anyone read that back in the 70s? That's mindfulness in action. Be here now. This is the cutting edge, tuned into God in us, higher mind. Rest in that, draw from that, deepen that intuition. Jesus said the same thing, I think, when he was teaching, telling people, do not worry about tomorrow, what you're going to eat or wear, what you're going to do. God provides, just like for the lilies of the field. Stay tuned into God, and God will grow you. God will provide for you. He told his disciples that were going to be going on after his death, don't worry about what you're going to say. If you get persecuted or arrested, don't worry about that. The Holy Spirit will tell you. God will be with you to tell you what to say at that moment. You will be provided for. If we stay in the moment and in touch with God, that's the key thing. What you know will be given to you. I think mindfulness means a few things, and one of them it means is stopping the subtle aggression that sometimes creeps into our prayer work, and even in our prayers for ourselves and our visioning for ourselves. I've always loved this quote from Emmett Fox. He talked about how too often we're too pushy in our prayers, trying to force things to happen. Instead of saying, pray hard for something, try to make something happen, Emmett Fox was always saying, pray soft, pray soft. In other words, rest in God, don't try to force things, let God guide you. It's an easier way, it's the non-aggressive way, and it's really the antidote to aggression, to rest, to pray soft, to let God guide us forward. So another quote that resonates with me year after year, I think it came from a writer, Rabbi Shapiro, I think. Dan, you might know better than I. But he was talking about prayer, that his approach to prayer was kind of like a woodworker in working with wood, a carpenter. Say, find the grain of the moment and go with it. Find the grain of the moment and go with it. In other words, whatever challenge, whatever project you're working on, whatever it is, don't just cut away and push and force your image of how you want to build this thing, but kind of find how's the grain flowing here, like the grain of the wood. You want to go with that. You don't want to force anything that's against that. Find the grain of the moment. What's your deep guidance telling you about how things are flowing right now? How can you go with that? How can you honor that in your choices, in your decisions, in your actions? Pray soft. So mindfulness means that, to a certain extent, stopping that kind of pushing in our prayers. Mindfulness also means stopping the kind of subtle aggression we practice toward ourselves. And I think that's something we don't think about often enough, how unkind we can be to ourselves. Trying to force ourselves to change in certain ways. Being very disgruntled and dissatisfied with where we are, that we should be higher, we should be better. Pushing, a kind of aggression toward ourselves, which sometimes even shows up in kind of a relentless self-improvement work. Anyone ever done there? We're working just so darn hard on our self-improvement. It's exhausting. It's terribly exhausting. I remember going to hear a speaker once at Unity on Maze, and he said, don't try to practice positive thinking. It's too tiring. Don't do it. And I knew just what he was talking about, because we work just too darn hard at it sometimes. We're okay as we are. You are all okay just as you are. Our essential selves are just fine. That pattern of wholeness, that image of God in us is just fine. And God knows how to grow us. We just have to kind of listen and allow and follow God's guidance as it comes. And God will grow us in some pretty amazing ways. We have evidence of that all around us right now. Nothing grows in an atmosphere of condemnation, like poisoning plants, and expecting them to grow. Nothing grows when deprived of nourishment or sunlight. We need to love ourselves. We need to nourish ourselves and honor ourselves. And our spiritual teachings are full of that as well. Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself, equally. Love yourself. We forget that part of it sometimes. Love your neighbor as yourself. The Buddha said, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. You yourself deserve your love and affection. We forget that. We forget that. Thich Nhat Hanh, this is a quote I used last week, I think, too. He was talking about mindfulness again, which is really just paying attention right here and now. And he said if you turn your mindfulness toward other people in your life, be really attentive, really mindful of them, they will bloom like flowers. And the part of that I thought, I didn't mention, I think it's helpful to reflect on, is the same is true of ourselves. When we regard ourselves mindfully, we're really paying attention to ourselves and where we are and honoring that. We will bloom like flowers. We will bloom like flowers because we will be nourishing ourselves, not condemning, not criticizing, not beating ourselves over the head about what we're not doing enough of or we're not good enough at, but practicing, like a Buddhist teacher talks about, a kind of universal friendliness toward ourselves as well as others. I am doing a great job. Let's take that as an affirmation. I am doing a great job. Yeah. The image, the power of God is in us. We are gifted. We have talents and gifts and abilities that are flowing through us, that are growing in us, and God is leading us forward on how to share those more and more each day. So I think this wonderful time of spring, this tremendous growth spurt around us, is a wonderful time to think about how God is growing us right now. How's that growth spurt pushing up in us a little bit right now, like the flowers coming out of the redbud tree bark and the hostas poking up out of the ground. What is coming up in us as we move forward? Because we're always growing. It never stops. That yardstick, we're still, if we do a mental spiritual yardstick, to measure where we are, I think we just go on and on. We don't know where that ceiling is on how high we can go, how much we can grow, how big our potential is, what's possible for us. So we stay tuned into God and let God guide us forward. Let God do the work of bringing out our gifts, our abilities, bringing us up higher into greater freedom and joy. And we love ourselves every step of that way. We love and nourish ourselves as we do each other, which is really kind of reciprocal. As we nourish others and honor them and are mindful of who they are and how they're coming up in the world, we do the same thing for ourselves. It's kind of reciprocal, isn't it? As we practice it for others, we regard ourselves in the same way. And we remember our wholeness is a given. Not one of us is without it. That's what that image of God quote from the Bible means to me. Not one of us is without that innate pattern of wholeness. It's given to us. We don't have to reinvent ourselves. We are just fine as we are, and we are coming up higher each day and each year by that growing grace of God in us. So here's my affirmation for the week, if you care to join me in it. I let God grow me into my highest self. Together? I let God grow me into my highest self. Let's take that into prayer for a moment. Affirm that truth within. God is guiding us moment by moment, and we are attuned to that. We recommit ourselves to remembering to live by God's guidance and direction, realizing our oneness with that power and presence. We are alert for its voice, for its divine ideas arising within us, for the opportunities that will be presented us, the doors that will open before us. We love ourselves, we nourish ourselves as we do others, knowing we are beloved, and we are being guided forward into all that is possible for us to become. We let God grow us, knowing all is well. So it is. Amen.